My name is Nate Ridgway, and I am a high school social studies teacher in Beech Grove, Indianapolis, Indiana. It's nice to meet you. If this is the first time that you've heard of Classtime, welcome. I'm basically here today to actually, from my experience of now using Classtime for over a year, to show you some innovative and different ways to use Classtime that you might not have ever thought of. And today, I want to use this app, and I'm going to do it through a whole bunch of subjects and also some of my own personal experience of using it, show you how you can use Classtime to stir controversy in your classroom. What I mean by stirring controversy is not only doing this for the purposes of getting kids engaged in whatever you're doing in the room, but then also to get them to the point where they're actually increasing the discussion that's happening around whatever topic matter it is in your room. And we know, just from us basic educators perspective, that if we can get kids engaged and we can spend more time kind of going around the content, hitting it from different angles or returning to it maybe after a bit of time, that the more our students are going to learn. And so that's what we're going to be kind of focusing here with Classtime in order for us to be able to do. So, what I thought I might do for you guys first is actually show you how I've done this in my class. So a little bit about me: I teach both a world history course as well as a dual credit US history course. And I'm going to show you how I've done this in my room, and then I'll kind of show you how I've kind of set this up for them and how we kind of return to it. And then once we do that, then we'll go look at some other subjects and we can dive into those, and hopefully you can kind of take some of these ideas and then use them in your classroom right away. If you're not familiar with Classtime, absolutely, you want to set up your profile. It's very, very simple. You just go to classtime.com and you can do that. But I'm going to assume at this point that you've already kind of understood that you've got a library and that you can distribute sessions to your students. There's lots of also information out there on how to do that. But for our purposes here, let's go ahead and go on. So what I've done for my students, and this is my dual credit US history class, I'm going to throw myself up here in the corner, is on this one particular day, we were really looking at the idea of social Darwinism. And so social Darwinism is a kind of more controversial topic in US history. And what it was kind of saying at the time, social Darwinism was that certain groups of people, and again, we're in about the 1900s here in the United States, is that certain groups of people were more successful in society simply because they were better equipped. So basically, the rich were rich because they were kind of a better, kind of equipped human, and that's why they were rich. And the poor people were poor because they were not necessarily well as equipped. And so what I did for them here is I gave them a link, and this was our simple warm-up procedure, and I can talk lots more about this, about how I linked them out to it, but it simply linked them to a very easy question. And so here I'll go pull up the question for you and what it actually looked like. Okay, and it said this: in society, whose job do you think it is to help the poor and fix broad social problems in society? Why or why not? And there's no, and this is a theme that I will return to here, is that you want to make sure that your question has no right or wrong answer. Okay, and that now, for my purposes here, and again, like depending on how versed you are with giving your kids controversial prompts in the class, you will probably want to, if you're doing this for the very first time, give them examples. And so, for example, what I did here is I gave them in the bar just below that you can do on Classtime, I gave them actual concrete things that they could reference. Now, my kids came up with a whole bunch of different answers for this, and I will go show those to you here real quickly. Okay, and so when I polled students on this initially, my idea that I really wanted to get to them is that we are in the first step, we're just brainstorming. There's no particularly wrong or right answers. Okay, so government, but again, I'm looking for them to explain their answers, which again, you'll probably have to continue to keep prompting your students that you want them to justify their thinking. So here's one student: they need to fix it themselves. They're poor due to their own misuse of money and their inability to take the educational opportunities to better their social and economic class. Now again, like some of these answers that you're going to get from students might again, be controversial, and that's the point. But let's keep going. We'll read a few different ones. The poor most relied on the government, even though the government didn't really help them, I think. So, not exactly sure. It's nobody's job for anyone else. It's my job as an individual to allow me to be successful. It's not my fault if my neighbor isn't as successful as me. Okay? All right, so here's another student. It's a responsibility of churches, local communities, and charities to help those in need, not the government. So we have a wide range of opinions. And then what I did from this point on is I said, okay, I know this is, obviously guys, there's no one correct answer here. This is extremely controversial, but now let's go and actually learn something in our content area that we can use to perhaps get us to answer this kind of question. You'll also notice here that in this session, I did not validate or mark down any student answers. And this is really, really important. If you've been using Classtime before and you've asked open-ended prompt questions, like fill in the blank questions that you want your students to use, this is the case where we don't want to do this because we actually want the kids to understand that in this one particular case, there's no one answer that we're looking for. Okay, so what we did from this point on in the lesson, again, this is going to vary for everybody, is we actually went through and we looked at some different answers. We compared two different answers that society had at this time, and that was the social gospel and then its return, social Darwinism. Okay, and we looked at two actual concrete examples of this. And what we did at the very, very end of the block, and I will show you this here at the very, very end, okay, is we actually looked at some different content, again, help us look at these questions, is I actually had the students go all the way back to the first slide, and they had to go and return to this question, and they had to go back, and this is an option you can do on Classtime, and I'll just show you this briefly, okay, if you need to know how. So back here in your library, whenever you start a new session, this is what I did, and you can see it right here. I don't have it checked. It says only allow one attempt per question, and that means that students can't answer or cannot edit their answer. I left that unchecked because I wanted students to go back to the warm-up that they just did, and after learning all the things that we did in class, to go back and rephrase their answer. So you can kind of see here that we're doing a lot of looping, would kind of be the technical word, right? So again, the keys here that I've kind of set down so far. Number one, when you write your prompt, you want to make sure there's no clear definitive answer. Number two, you want to make sure that whatever you go and do in your particular class from then on, you want to keep either relating back to that question in some way, or you want your content that you're going to talk about to maybe be addressing that question. And then number three is ultimately you want to be looping back to that, either maybe midway through the class or at the very end. It could be completely up to you when you want to do it. And you may even do it multiple times. Again, the more the better. So, causing controversy. Let's actually look at some different ways you might do this in a few different subjects. Okay, so what I've done here is I've just come up with some very basic controversy prompts for many different subject areas. And again, there's no right or wrong question here. The point here is that we were trying to actually put something out there that has no clear answer that we're getting our students to return to multiple times. Okay, so for math, let's say, for example, you're teaching multiplication and division. Okay, now you're like, how could something be controversial in math? 2 + 2 is 4. Well, sometimes you can cleverly disguise prompts that actually do have a correct answer, but you're asking a more general question at first. So here's what I mean. So for example, let's say you're teaching multiplication and dividing of negative numbers. Is it true that 2 wrongs can make a right, or don't make a right? Now, obviously, your students are going to probably talk about other things. Like if somebody did something to me, then I did something back to them. That's okay. Okay. But here, we know from being smart individuals that in this case, actually multiplying or dividing 2 negative numbers does make a right. Okay. And again, we could go back and we could reference that and reassess that at the end of the class period to see, oh yeah, in this case, if I do 2 negative or do 2 negative numbers, it does actually make a right. Okay, and we can check that their understanding is increased over time. Let's see. So English, referencing Catch-22. A boy or girl you're interested in wants to see a movie you absolutely hate. Let's say it's Marvel or DC, one of the classic student rivalries, especially for high schoolers and middle schoolers. And even elementary schoolers, they have some very strong opinions about this. Can you come up with a situation where you both win, or is it impossible? And so what we've done here is we've tried to come up with a concrete situation that students can reference, again, something they know about and can relate to, and then we're going to relate it to a text, in this case Catch-22, that students might be reading in class. In the name of science, should scientists be allowed to invent or test on anything they can? Or are there some boundaries that shouldn't be crossed? Okay, and we could mention, again, some examples here that students might need to reference. So for example, like, should humans be allowed to test on rats? Or should humans be allowed to test things on other humans? I don't know. Okay, and then again, we might go and talk about things like Marie Curie, and the fact that she was testing kind of in a way on herself with her studies on radiation. I don't know, lots of different ways you could take that. ELL or foreign language students, a good one that could start off maybe a conversation about like if you travel to another country, let's say you're taking a class somewhere. Should new students in a foreign country be forced to speak the host country's dominant language? Why? And again, students are going to have a lot of very complex feelings about this. Okay, but it could be really good if you're taking a field trip with a group of students to another country, or if you're learning about like what school is like in another country. Could be something you might explore. Music and band. You can even do class time with this. Should musicians only play music in the style that composers originally intended them to be in? Or should they be free to reinvent and reinterpret them? Okay, now this is in some ways like the essence of some art forms like hip hop, okay, but then you contrast that to like classical music, where if, for example, you're giving this warm to your kids and they're right before like you introduce them the music they're going to play for things like solo and ensemble, should your students be free, or should you be free to kind of address this question for them? Like, we're taking this in a new direction. We don't exactly think the director or the composer of this music should kind of like be here right now. I don't know. P, athletics and sports. Okay, a really quick question you might do at the beginning of beginning of a class period or block with them, and then return to after you've explained, like changes in the rules of football. So the rules for many sports have been changed over time, adding in video replays in order to review, making safety gear required. Have these changes gone too far to the point where the original sport has been somehow lost? Why or why not? So you could mention examples here. So here's again some scaffolding you might give your kids of changing kickoff distances or adding goal line technology in soccer, which was a pretty controversial thing that was added here just in the last couple of years. I don't know. Okay, but again, the idea is that we should be able to take these prompts. They don't have a definitive answer. We then jump into them somehow in the content in our lessons, and then our students, just like we did here in this session for my dual credit class, they can return to them and then go and re-edit their answers, and we can actually see if they have if their understanding has changed, and we can kind of reassess to see have they met the objectives that we wanted for them for that particular day. So what I'll do here below, and you will see this in some links here that I'll provide, is I'll provide links to those prompts as well as like links to the actual questions, and I will also send out a link to this particular lesson that I did this kind of reflective activity with. And until next time, we will look at some other ways that we can do some cool and unique things with class time. Bye-bye.